Hi guys, hopefully this will be a reasonably quick video. We're going to cover three things. One is how to make and edit curves using the EP curve tool. Two is how to attach objects to that curve so that they can animate down them. And then three is how to do a parent constraint and also kind of the difference between what a parent constraint is and just parenting directly in Maya. All right, well, to get started, you can see I just have a little bit of a demo here where as the timeline goes down, you can see that the little toy car follows the curve all the way until the end. And we'll go through from start to finish, creating all these elements kind of in order so that you can get going with your own, creating your own curve and then attaching the car to that curve and starting to animate on that. All right, so to do that, I'll go ahead and just make a new scene. Or actually, I'll just go ahead and delete all the stuff so I don't have to remake my little box and plane because that's kind of annoying. Okay, I'll move my reference so that I'm starting from exactly where we would be if all we had was a box and a plane. Okay, so if I decided that I wanted a little toy car to drive across the top of this box, and off and hit the ground, go. Kind of the first thing that I would do would be, well, one of two things. The first thing I'll go ahead and do is go ahead and import the toy car as a reference. So to do that, you go to File, Reference Editor, hit the reference sign, and because this project is set up to be the project folder, the toy car rig, I can, when I do my reference, it automatically opens up into here, and all I have to do is select toy car and reference. Once I do that, it appears at world space 000 or wherever it is in the reference itself. Okay, so the next step would be to make a curve for my toy car to drive down. To do that, I'm going to use the EP Curve tool, and you can find the EP Curve tool here under Curves and Surfaces. So by default, I think Maya has it on Poly Modeling. So if you just select Curves and Surfaces, it'll bring up the right menu. And then the icon that you want is this one that kind of looks like a reverse S. And if you hover over, you can actually see down here, there are tooltips in the bottom left of Maya. So for anything, if you hover your mouse over it, you can get a little bit of information about what's going on. So if you hover over this one, it says EP Curve Tool. Also, with any of these buttons, if you double click them, it'll automatically bring up the tool settings for that current tool that you've just selected. So over here, you can see that currently my EP Curve tool is set to 3 Bezier. And I think by default, it's on 3 cubic. And so how that works is that it's going to average the 3 points of the curve as you're clicking around. This one is kind of quick and easy, so you can see here, I'll just demo it. So if I start clicking in my scene, you can see that as I put more and more points, it's kind of averaging the line between the different selection points that I have. So if sorry, I just went a little quick right there. Let me start over just so you can see I'll talk through exactly what I'm doing. So if I have my EP Curve tool active and I'm left clicking in my orthographic view, it's going to put points right along the grid. Okay? And so you can see as I'm clicking, what it's doing because of this setting is it's averaging this curve between 3 points. So this point, and this point, the curve is all averaged between that. And then if I hit Q, or if I go over here and select any of these tools, it'll kind of take me out of curve generation mode and it will kind of lock in my current curve. So if I just select that, you can see how it's turned green. That indicates that I'm no longer able to click and add more points currently. But if I select my curve and I right click and I go over to Control Vertex, you can actually see the points that are affecting the curve. And so you can select them, hit W to activate Move Tool, and then you can continue to edit the curve even after you're done. But this mode, I guess, what is it called? 3 cubic is actually not the one that I want to use. I want to use 3 Bezier. And if you guys have used Illustrator, it's very similar in how Illustrator does a lot of the pen tool, so if I hit left mouse button, it'll start creating anchor points like this. And it might look similar to the 3 cubic, but if I hit Q to kind of finalize my curve, and then I right click on it and then I say control vertex, now the points are actually directly on the curve. And they actually come with these other handles that if you manipulate them, you can adjust the overall curve and get you have much more control in this mode than you do with just a single point of control, because now this has 3 points of control to create the final curve. All right, sorry about that weird cut, little technical difficulties. All right, so something to keep an eye on that can make the behavior of the curve be a little weird. Just some hotkeys that might accidentally get selected, or some settings in Maya that might affect other things too. So if you have your middle point selected, but you also accidentally have turned on like object symmetry for some reason, it'll make it so that you automatically can control all of them all at the same time. With this turned off, if you select your middle point, by default, Maya brings all of that together. Also, if you select one of your handles and this is turned off, then it will actually behave uniformly. If you don't want that to happen, if you select your middle point once again, go to Curves, Bezier Curves, Anchor Presets, and say Bezier Corner, then that makes it breaks the handles, and it makes it so that you can control them individually. And that they also can be weighted. So that just makes it a little bit easier to control. All right, but I don't really want that to be the case, so I'm gonna undo and just have them working together for now. So you can see that here I only have a few points of control in my current curve. So if I were to set the beginning of my path to be here right along the box, then there's a point maybe where the car is about to drive over the edge. I flatten that out so that it stays nice and flat the whole way. Then he drives as though he would fly all the way down here, land, I guess somewhere about right here, maybe bounce up and down again. And then this would be kind of where maybe he would have one last bounce before coming to a stop. Okay, so like I said before, if you want to have independent control over each of these arms, that seems like it would be a good idea for this. But first thing I'll do is maybe stretch that out. Select my middle point, go to Curves, Bezier Curves, Anchor Presets, Bezier Corner. Then you can control each of these. So this seems like a nice curve, nice curve for him to come in impact. Then I'll grab this point, pick it up, select the middle point once again, Curves, Anchor Presets, Bezier Corner. Then I can have him bounce up, maybe bounce up one more time. But then here at the end, what I would want is for it to kind of land and then maybe go straight again. So if I wanted to add in another point of control after I've finished my curve, all you got to do is this. You select it, right click, say curve point, and then if you click and hold left mouse button on your curve, you can see this little indicator pops up on your curve. When you let go, it will stay there. Then you just go to Curves and say Insert Knot. And what that's going to do is now, if I right click on my curve once again, go to Control Vertex, you can see I have this extra point of control. So I can maybe flatten this out, have it line up with this. So now I have this section at the end where it's just staying flat, but I want to have this one more bounce. I'll move it over so the bounce makes a little more sense. Select my middle control point, go to Curves, Bezier Curves, Corner. Now I can control this. All right, So we're looking a little bit better. We've got our two sides of the bounce pretty even. All right. So here's my curve. Drives down the box, drives off the box, hits the ground, goes up once, hits the ground again, hits the ground a third time, and then kind of goes straight. One thing you can do also if you want to line things up perfectly is use some of the snapping. And I might have mentioned this in class a few times, but in case you were otherwise occupied, when you have something selected and you are on your move tool, if you hold down X, it snaps the points on your grid. So you can see it's lining up perfectly here. So if I go to the edge of my box, you can see that this grid point, one down, is pretty much the bottom of the box. So I'm going to hold X and snap that point to there. I'll highlight this bounce. And you can see that this line comes over like that. Hold X. And you can snap in one direction at a time, actually. So if you're holding X and you only have the vertical selected, it'll just move it in that direction. Alternatively, if you hold X and you click in the middle, it'll do it on both directions of the view. So you can see how now I'm able to go left and right and up and down and snap. But really, I just want to go up and down. So I'll hold X, drag vertically. Now I'm lined up perfectly with that point. And this point, I'll hold Shift, actually, select that point and that point, press X, and then snap. Looks like maybe that behaved a little weird. Just make sure that everything is right along that plane. Okay. So this curve is pretty good for now, for demo purposes. So I'll go ahead and right-click on it and go back to object mode, and then just click on the background so that nothing's selected. So that's making a curve, adding points, and actually, I guess I didn't tell you how to delete them, but it's pretty simple. If you've gone to control vertexes, if you've selected one of your middle points and you just hit delete, that'll delete that control vertex. But I don't want to do that, so I'm going to undo that. But that's basically how you do it. So now you know how to make a curve using the EP curve tool with the Bezier option. You know how to delete points by just selecting them and hitting delete. And you also know how to insert another control point by right-clicking on it, going to curve point, dragging along, and then at this point, if I went to curves and said insert not, it would put a new control point right there. All right, so next step is attaching an object to a path so that it can animate. So I'll hit spacebar and just go back to the perspective views because it's a little bit easier for me to work with. All right, so the thing that I'm going to attach to this curve is called a locator. And to make a locator, I just go to Create, Locator. And it makes it at world space 000 like it makes everything else. So that's why it appeared under the car. So it might have looked like it didn't make anything, but it appeared here in my outliner. And you can select it there by clicking on it, or you can, in the scene, click on it like that. Okay, so I like to use locators just as a general rule of thumb, but you could also attach a sphere if you wanted to. So if you just hit the sphere button, it makes a sphere at 000. You could attach this to the path just as easily. So to do that, you select your path first, and then you hold Shift and click on whatever object you want to be the second object, which is my locator. So Shift click the locator in the scene, or if you are on Windows, if you select your path and hold Control and click in your outliner, the locator, that would do the correct selection. If you're on Mac, it's Command, but I'm in Windows, so if I select my curve, hold Control, click my locator and my outliner, we're all set up to attach a motion path. So you switch over to Rigging for your shelf, go to Constrain, Motion Paths, and then Attach to Motion Path. And I'm going to bring up the options box just so that you can see what's going on here. When I attach this as a motion path, it's going to use my time slider as my beginning and end point, because what it's going to do is it's going to put whatever object is there at the beginning of the curve at frame 1, and then at the end, at frame 120, it'll be at the end of my curve. I want to say that the front is a Z and that the top is Y. This is important for the car because you can see here, if I move my car in the Z direction, it goes forward. So that's the direction that I want to be my front axis. And if the car goes in the Y direction, it goes up. So I want the up axis to be the Y. All right, so I'll go ahead and redo my selection, select the curve, control click my locator, and hit attach. So you can see that it snapped to the beginning of my curve here. And if I click on my locator and then go into my channel box, you can see that it put a new input here. It's called motion path 1. That's what it always calls motion paths by default. It'll just keep adding more numbers for additional motion paths. But this one's called motion path 1. So if you click that, you can see there are a couple things that you can control. The U value is basically where on the curve it's going to be. And so if I have my graph editor here, you can see that I've got my motion path selected, and the U value is represented here. So at frame 1, its value is 0, and at frame 120, its value is 1. So as I scroll down, or if I scrub down the timeline, you can see that it moves down the path based on that. So if I wanted it to go faster, I can shift click on my timeline to bring up the little red option and click on the middle arrows, or alternatively, I like to use the graph editor because it's a little bit easier to control. You can just select that keyframe on your U value and type, instead of on frame 120, just type 60, and it'll take it to frame 60. So now it gets to the end of the curve by frame 60, and then it doesn't do anything. So you can imagine that's how you would kind of change the speed of things, by adding in additional keyframes on this U value. So if I am selected on my curve, and in my graph editor, I'll show you a trick for adding keyframes in the graph editor. If you selected your curve, you right click on your curve and you say insert key, it'll put a point right where you are. And then you can highlight that key and you can do whatever you want to it. So you can move it earlier in the timeline, you can move it later in the timeline, you can increase the value of so that would be farther down the curve, and that would be less far down the curve. So what that actually would mean is, if I scrolled it this way, that would mean that it would be slow down the curve, and then once it hits here, it would start to go fast, because for 60 frames it only goes this far down the curve, and then for 60 frames it actually does a majority of the curve. So if I play the animation, you can see that it goes slow and then it speeds up. And that's kind of what I was looking for, because he kind of accelerates into it and then blam, 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 and then that's it. And I might even have a little bit more of an ease here at the end. So I'll just extend that curve that way a little bit, pull this down, select this curve, flatten it, pull that so it doesn't go below. You don't ever want it to go below 0, because that's like basically off the curve. All right. So with that, you can see just with the single extra keyframe, now it hits pretty hard and then it kind of slows down at the end. All right. So now that you have your motion path, the final step would be to attach your car to this locator. And the reason that you want to do it this way instead of attaching the car directly to the path is so that you can turn off and on the parent constraint. And that way you can hand key animation sometimes, and then other times you can let the motion path take control. So to get that set up, what you want to do is select your locator first, and then control click on your group. So the toy group, if I were to select this high level thing and move it around, it moves everything, because that contains all the stuff for the toy car. You wouldn't want to attach this thing, because that would limit your ability to do keyframes. Because if you watch, so if I selected my locator and then I selected my control second and I said parent constraint, go like that. So it might look like it's functioning okay, but then if I wanted to be like, oh, I want to have it bumping as it goes down the road, here, now I go into my Y channel and I say key selected, it doesn't really know what to do. So now it doesn't really do the right thing as I'm animating down the timeline. Like it's kind of competing. It's not really clean. You don't know what is where because the colors aren't giving you a nice clear indication. So to avoid that conflict, what you want to do is make sure that everything is zeroed out before you do your parent constraint. So go ahead and make sure your controls are set to 0. Select your locator, control click your group, and say constrain parent, then say maintain offset. Just make sure that's turned off, and what that will do is snap the card directly on top of your locator. So you hit apply. Now, as it goes down the timeline, you can still add keyframes here, and it's nice and clear what's going on because you know that it's only on the control instead of both the control and the parent constraint. Okay, so the final thing is being able to turn off and on a constraint so that you can do other animation. So this is the object that got created when I did my parent constraint. It's called Toy Car Parent Constraint. So if you open up your group, you can see this is now an object, and over here in your channel box you can see all the different channels. The locator, 1W0, that's the thing that says whether or not this group is going to follow the locator. So right now it's set to 1, which means it has 100% influence. So if I set it to 0, that would basically mean that it's off. So now, as the locator goes down the timeline, you can see it kind of going back and forth, even though it's a little tiny. It's not going anywhere. But if you select your parent constraint and you turn it back on, now it does follow it. The one thing to keep in mind is that when you turn it off, it's going to go back to the position it was when it was first attached. So even though I'm at frame 76 and I'm far down, if I turn off the influence of the parent constraint, it's going to take it back to the beginning. So you have to be careful with when you turn it off, knowing where your object is. That's kind of my last little hint for this tutorial. Okay, if you have any other questions or you need any additional guidance, just shoot me an email or bring your questions to class. All right, thanks.